The Zephyrian exotic pet dealers thought they'd found the galaxy's biggest suckers when humans started buying void stalker cubs, apex predators so deadly that most civilizations won't even speak their name above a whisper. What kind of idiotic species adopts a creature that could disembowel a battle mech as a family companion? The kind that doesn't see pets and weapons as mutually exclusive concepts, apparently. While alien traders were placing bets on how quickly the humans would become lunch, something far more terrifying was happening. The cubs weren't just surviving human contact, they were learning to love it. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to HFY Havoc, hit the bell, and like this video. Because if you want more epic HFY sci-fi stories like this one, you don't want to miss out. What the galaxy witnessed next would redefine the very concept of interspecies warfare, one belly rub at a time. The Kexaval had seen some monumentally stupid purchasing decisions in his 37 cycles running the Crimson Nexus exotic pet market. But watching the human delegation casually browse the Voidstalker enclosure, like they were shopping for houseplants, reached entirely new depths of suicidal optimism. "The small one with the silver markings," the human female said, pointing at a cub that had just finished gnawing through a titanium feeding dish. "How much?" The Zephyrian trader's throat sac inflated involuntarily, a biological response he'd developed after decades of witnessing customer stupidity. But this transcended his usual encounters with overconfident buyers. Void stalkers weren't pets. They were living nightmares that evolved specifically to hunt anything with a pulse, including their own parents. "Honored customer," Kexaval wheezed, his voice carrying that particular tone, reserved for explaining why setting oneself on fire was inadvisable. "Perhaps you misunderstood the species classification. These are Category 9 apex predators. The Hegemony Council banned private ownership after the Andromeda Station incident." "The one where 3 cubs ate their way through 2 security battalions?" The human male consulted a data pad, with the same casual interest someone might show checking a shopping list. "Yeah, we read the reports. Fascinating tactical adaptation under pressure." Behind them, a cluster of Nexari merchants had abandoned their own stalls to witness what they clearly expected would be either the galaxy's shortest pet ownership experience or its most entertaining execution. One had even started taking bets. "Tactical adaptation," repeated Kexaval slowly, wondering if universal translators had somehow malfunctioned. "You understand these creatures mature to roughly twice your body mass and possess retractable claws capable of penetrating starship hull plating?" "Retractable claws are actually a plus," the human female noted, making check marks on her pad. "Better for indoor surfaces." "What about housebreaking?" The Nexari betting pool immediately doubled. A Vorthon observer, whose species prided itself on logical decision-making, couldn't contain himself. "Forgive the interruption, but are your people perhaps unaware that void stalkers consume approximately 47% of their adoptive caretakers within the first standard month?" "47% seems low," the male human replied. "What's the margin of error on that study? Sample size? Control groups?" "The sample size was every recorded adoption attempt in galactic history," the Vorthon sputtered. "The control group died. Correlation isn't causation." The female human had moved closer to the enclosure, where the silver-marked cub was performing what could generously be called playful stalking behavior, and more accurately described as hunting practice. Maybe previous owners used the wrong approach. Kexaval watched in horrified fascination as the cub pressed its face against the containment field, studying the humans with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. Void stalkers were smart enough to plan, patient enough to wait, and creative enough to find weaknesses that military strategists missed. What approach could possibly work with a creature that views everything as either food or competition? Demanded a hegemony observer who'd been quietly monitoring the transaction. Partnership, said the male human simply. The word landed like a tactical nuke in the middle of casual conversation. Every alien within hearing range went silent, processing what they'd just heard with the collective horror of sentient beings who understood exactly how terrifyingly naive that sounded. Partnership, Kexval repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. With a void stalker. Why not? They're pack hunters in the wild, social creatures. Intelligence indicates capacity for cooperation. The female human was now crouched at the enclosure's edge, completely ignoring the fact that the cub was calculating optimal attack angles. The problem isn't the species. It's that everyone treats them like monsters instead of potential allies. A Nexari merchant leaned toward his companion. Should we tell them that the last potential ally scenario ended with an entire research station being redesigned as a hunting preserve? Let them learn firsthand, his friend whispered back. The entertainment value alone justifies the medical cleanup costs. But Kexval noticed something that made his primary stomach turn uncomfortably. The cub wasn't exhibiting standard predatory behavior anymore. Its head tilted at the same angle as the human female's, and when she shifted her weight, it mirrored the movement. Not hunting behavior. Recognition behavior. The price, he said quickly, suddenly desperate to complete this transaction before his survival instincts overrode his profit margins, is 50,000 galactic credits, plus shipping, medical insurance, and a comprehensive liability waiver that absolves this establishment of any responsibility for dismemberment, consumption, psychological trauma, or planetary evacuation orders. Deal. The male human transferred the credits without hesitation. When can we take delivery? Immediately, please. The sooner, the better. As the humans completed their paperwork, the gathered alien crowd began placing increasingly creative bets on survival timeframes, cause of death, and whether any recognizable remains would be recovered for funeral purposes. The Vorthon Observer had started a subcategory specifically for ironic death scenarios. What none of them noticed, what none of them could have predicted, was that the silver-marked cub had stopped testing the enclosure's weak points and started watching the humans with something that looked disturbingly like anticipation. Kexval handed over the transport authorization with hands that trembled slightly. Any final questions about care requirements? Just one, the female human said, shouldering her pack as containment crews prepared the cub for transfer. What's his name? Void stalkers don't have names. They have threat classifications. Well, he does now. As the humans departed with their new pet, Kexval found himself staring at the empty enclosure and wondering if he'd just witnessed the beginning of something unprecedented, or simply enabled the most expensive suicide in galactic history. The Nexari merchants were already calculating odds on both possibilities. 3 weeks after the Crimson Nexus transaction, Commander Thisara of the Hegemony Intelligence Division found herself staring at surveillance footage that defied every xenobiological principle she'd studied in her distinguished career. The feeds from Human Colony Designation Tau 7 showed something that should have been impossible. A void stalker cub playing fetch. Run the behavioral analysis again, she ordered her subordinate, a methodical Karathi whose species specialized in pattern recognition. Same results, Commander. The creature exhibits 0 aggression markers toward its human handlers. Instead, we're detecting elevated oxytocin analogs, synchronized breathing patterns, and what our algorithms classify as recreational interaction protocols. Thisara's compound eyes rotated independently, a nervous habit that emerged whenever reality decided to ignore established facts. Recreational interaction protocols. You're telling me that an apex predator designed by evolution to consume anything that moves is having fun? The terminology feels inadequate, admitted her analyst. But the biometric data suggests genuine emotional bonding, cross-species emotional bonding, Commander. On screen, the human male, designated Target Alpha in their files, threw a synthetic disc across what appeared to be a standard residential courtyard. The Void Stalker bounded after it with enthusiasm that would have been adorable if not for the fact that each playful leap covered roughly 15 meters and left claw marks in reinforced concrete. Maybe they drugged it, suggested Lieutenant Coron, the team's biochemical specialist. Sedatives, mood regulators, neural inhibitors. Negative. We've been monitoring atmospheric composition around the colony for pharmaceutical traces. Nothing beyond standard human recreational substances. And those wouldn't affect Void Stalker neurology anyway. Thisara watched as Target Alpha caught the returning disc and immediately began what looked like a training exercise, except instead of teaching the creature to heel or sit, he was demonstrating tactical flanking maneuvers using hand signals. Are we certain this is the same species that devoured the research team on Kepler Prime? DNA analysis confirms genetic identity. This specimen is, if anything, slightly larger and more physically capable than the Kepler subjects. The analyst pulled up a comparison chart. However, the behavioral divergence is so extreme that our computers initially classified it as a different species entirely. The training session continued, and Thisara realized she was watching something that violated fundamental assumptions about predator psychology. The Void Stalker wasn't being controlled or coerced. It was learning because it wanted to learn, participating because it chose to participate. They're not treating it like a pet, she murmured, the implications crystallizing in her mind with uncomfortable clarity. Commander? Look at the body language. The human isn't dominant, and the creature isn't submissive. She paused, searching for terminology that didn't exist in military doctrine. Collaborating. Her communication array chimed with an incoming priority transmission. Fleet Admiral Vextar's scarred face materialized in the hologram projector, looking as perpetually irritated as only a career military officer could. Status report, Commander. Please tell me you have a reasonable explanation for why my intelligence division is wasting resources monitoring human pet ownership. Sir, what we're observing suggests this isn't pet ownership in any conventional sense. The humans appear to be forming genuine partnerships with Void Stalkers. The Admiral's expression shifted from irritation to skepticism. Partnerships with Category 9 predators. The behavioral data supports no other conclusion. They're not domesticating these creatures. They're recruiting them. A long pause stretched across the communication channel while Vextar processed this information. Show me. Thisara transferred the feed to his command center, watching his reaction as the human and Void Stalker executed increasingly complex tactical exercises. What started as simple coordination evolved into sophisticated battlefield scenarios, complete with flanking patterns, synchronized timing, and communication protocols that seemed to bypass language entirely. Sweet nebulas, breathed the Admiral. They're building a military unit. A military unit composed of the galaxy's most effective natural killers, and the species notorious for adopting anything that doesn't immediately eat them, Thisara confirmed. The strategic implications are terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Vextar leaned forward, studying the display with professional interest that bordered on grudging admiration. How many of these partnerships are they establishing? Intelligence suggests at least 12 colonies have acquired Void Stalker specimens in the past month, all following identical integration protocols. Integration protocols, the Admiral repeated slowly. They've systematized this process. It appears to be part of a broader military initiative, code designation Companion Corps, according to intercepted communications. The transmission feed flickered as Target Alpha and his partner began what could only be described as combat drills. The Void Stalker moved through obstacle courses with fluid precision, while the human provided tactical guidance through subtle gesture commands. Neither species dominated the exercise. Both contributed unique capabilities toward shared objectives. "This changes everything," Vextar said finally. "If humans can successfully integrate Void Stalkers into military operations, every established military doctrine becomes obsolete overnight," Thesaura finished. "No existing defense system accounts for coordinated human-predator tactical units." They watched in silence as the training session concluded with the human and Void Stalker settling down together, the creature's massive head resting comfortably against the human's shoulder, while both studied tactical displays on a portable screen. "Commander," the Admiral said slowly, "I want continuous monitoring of all human colonies. Priority Alpha classification, and get me a direct line to High Command." "Sir, should we consider this a potential threat?" Admiral Vextar studied the feed one final time, the image of natural enemies turned willing allies, sharing information and coordinating strategies with the easy familiarity of genuine teammates. "Commander," he said quietly, "I think we're watching the birth of something that makes potential threat sound optimistically inadequate. The siege of Proxima Relay should have been a straightforward orbital bombardment, 3 hegemony dreadnoughts versus 1 undermanned human research station with outdated defensive systems. General Zethikor had planned to conclude hostilities before his morning meal, file the appropriate conquest paperwork, and return to his flagship for a well-deserved rest cycle. Instead, he found himself crouched behind the twisted wreckage of his command vehicle, listening to his communications officer scream into the radio about shadows that moved wrong and humans who fought like demons possessed. "Squad 7, report status," he barked into his personal comm unit. Static answered him. Squad 7 had gone dark 14 minutes ago, along with Squads 3, 5, and 12. His tactical display showed red markers where entire platoons had simply vanished. "Sir," gasped Sergeant Vrixtal, crawling toward the general's position while clutching a gaping wound in his flank. "We need immediate evacuation. This isn't conventional warfare." "Explain." "The humans aren't fighting alone. They've got things with them. Predators, moving in perfect coordination like they're reading each other's minds." General Zethkor had dismissed intelligence reports about human companion units as psychological warfare nonsense, propaganda designed to make his troops hesitate. Now, watching his veteran soldiers retreat in barely controlled panic, he began reconsidering that assessment. A low growl echoed from somewhere beyond the rubble field, a sound that activated primal fear responses coded into DNA across 17 different species. His remaining troops instinctively tightened formation, weapons raised, scanning for threats that refused to materialize in obvious locations. "Contact, bearing 270, whispered his sniper, voice tight with professional terror. "I can see. General, I don't think I should engage." "Why not?" "Because there's a human with it, and they're not fighting each other. They're hunting us together." Through his scope, Zethkor witnessed something that rewrote his understanding of interspecies warfare. A human soldier moved through cover with mechanical precision, while a massive silver-furred shape flowed parallel to his position, both advancing on his troops with the coordinated lethality of pack hunters. Neither species commanded the other. They functioned as integrated tactical elements, each contributing specialized capabilities to shared objectives. "Open fire," he ordered. The engagement lasted exactly 17 seconds. When the dust settled, his entire forward element had been neutralized, without the human predator team sustaining visible casualties. Worse, they'd accomplished this through surgical precision rather than overwhelming force, suggesting strategic thinking that transcended simple animal cunning. General Zethkor. The human voice emerged from his communication array with irritating clarity. This is Captain Rodriguez of the Companion Corps. I'm afraid you've made a tactical error. Surrender is not an option, Zethkor replied automatically. I wasn't offering surrender terms. I was providing professional courtesy notice that you're about to discover why the Proxima Research Station requested Companion Corps deployment instead of traditional military support. The general's tactical display lit up with new contacts, dozens of them, surrounding his remaining forces with movements too fast and too coordinated for conventional troops. Each contact moved in paired formation, suggesting his forces faced not an army, but a collection of perfectly synchronized hunting partnerships. You see, continued the human captain conversationally, traditional military doctrine assumes conflicts between species operating under similar behavioral parameters. Same weapon systems, comparable tactics, predictable response patterns. A series of explosions echoed across the battlefield as Zethkor's artillery positions went silent. His remaining vehicles reported incoming attacks from angles that shouldn't have been accessible, executed with precision that suggested intimate knowledge of his equipment specifications. Captain Rodriguez continued. The thing about partnerships is that they combine different strengths instead of duplicating identical capabilities. Humans excel at strategic planning, tool usage, and adaptive problem-solving. Void Stalkers contribute enhanced sensory awareness, superior mobility, and instinctual combat optimization. Impossible, Zethkor muttered, watching his supposedly impregnable defensive positions collapse with systematic efficiency. Cross-species military integration doesn't work. Coordination requires shared communication protocols, compatible command structures. General, you're thinking like a military officer instead of a partner. We don't command our companions any more than they command us. We collaborate. Big difference. Through his viewfinder, the general observed a human soldier providing overwatch while his Void Stalker partner infiltrated enemy positions, using routes that would have been inaccessible to bipedal species. When the predator encountered resistance, the human provided suppressive fire without verbal coordination. They moved like components of a single organism distributed across multiple bodies. This violates established military principles, he protested weakly. Only if you assume military principles represent universal constants instead of cultural preferences. Turns out, when you stop trying to control everything and start working with what you've got, you discover capabilities that don't show up in standard tactical manuals. His remaining forces were surrendering faster than he could process surrender requests. Not because they'd been overwhelmed by superior numbers, but because they faced opposition that operated according to rules nobody had thought to develop countermeasures against. General, Rodriguez said gently, your evacuation transport is being permitted to depart. Take your people home and inform High Command that humanity is no longer interested in fighting wars the traditional way. As Zethkor's forces retreated toward their extraction point, he caught a final glimpse of the human captain standing beside his silver-furred partner. Neither species looked particularly triumphant. They simply looked competent, like professionals who'd completed routine work with satisfactory results. Rodriguez, he called through the comm channel. What do you call this tactical approach? Partnership, General. We told you that from the beginning. The evacuation transport lifted off, carrying the remainder of what had been the hegemony's most decorated assault division. Behind them, human Void Stalker teams resumed patrol patterns around the research station, moving with the easy coordination of partnerships that had transcended the limitations of single-species thinking. General Zethkor spent the return journey composing reports that would fundamentally alter galactic military doctrine, assuming anyone believed them. 6 months after the Proxima Relay incident, Kekseval discovered that running the galaxy's premier exotic pet market had become significantly more complicated than simply matching dangerous creatures with suicidally optimistic buyers. The booth directly across from his now sported a professionally manufactured sign reading Interspecies Integration Consulting Services, and the line of desperate alien military representatives stretched halfway around the station's primary commerce ring. Next, called the human consultant, a cheerfully professional woman whose credentials apparently included successful partnership facilitation with Category 9 apex predators and revolutionary tactical applications in asymmetric warfare scenarios. A draconian general shuffled forward, his ceremonial armor clicking with each nervous step. We require immediate consultation regarding Nexus Wolfpack integration. Our preliminary attempts have resulted in 17 casualties and a formal complaint from our medical insurance consortium. Standard bonding protocol challenges, the consultant noted, making entries on her data pad with the casual efficiency of someone discussing weather patterns. Nexus Wolves respond to alpha dominance hierarchies. You've been approaching them as subordinates instead of equals. Elementary mistake. But they're animals, protested the general. So are humans, technically. Intelligence manifests differently across species. Schedule says I can fit you in for a 3-week intensive program next month. Standard fee is 40,000 credits, plus materials and medical coverage for your volunteer integration candidates. Kekseval watched this exchange with the mounting horror of someone witnessing the fundamental restructuring of galactic power dynamics in real time. What had begun as humans making questionable pet purchasing decisions had evolved into a thriving consultation industry that was systematically dismantling thousands of years of established military doctrine. Excuse me. A Vorthan representative approached the human consultant with the desperate politeness of someone whose civilization's survival depended on learning impossible skills. We've heard reports about human success with quantum wraiths. Our science division considers this theoretically impossible. Quantum wraiths are interdimensional hunters, not pets, the consultant agreed. Partnership requires understanding their phase shift patterns and developing compatible combat rhythms. Challenging, but manageable with proper training methodology. You've successfully integrated quantum wraiths into military operations. 3 separate campaigns. Turns out they appreciate tactical creativity more than rigid command structures. Who knew? Kekseval abandoned his own customers to eavesdrop more effectively. The conversations he overheard suggested that humans had quietly revolutionized interspecies warfare, while everyone else was still calculating casualty predictions from their original pet purchases. A Karathi officer leaned across the consultation booth. What about hive renders? Our xenobiology experts insist they're impossible to work with due to collective consciousness incompatibility. Collective consciousness is actually an advantage once you learn to interface properly. The trick is thinking in network protocols instead of individual commands. We've got a hive render specialist arriving next week if you want to schedule preliminary assessment sessions. The Zephyrian trader felt his throat sac deflate completely. Humans weren't just adopting dangerous predators anymore. They were teaching other species how to do it, creating a galaxy-wide shift toward partnership-based military thinking that made traditional conquest strategies obsolete. Kekseval? The familiar voice belonged to Admiral Vextar, who approached with the grim expression of someone whose entire career had been rendered professionally irrelevant. I need to purchase integration consulting services. You're asking me to help you buy advice from humans about working with the same creatures I used to sell them as suicide by pet scenarios? The Strategic Council has formally acknowledged that conventional military approaches are no longer viable against human companion tactical units. Either we adapt their methods or accept permanent strategic disadvantage. The irony was so dense it created its own gravitational field. The species that had once taken bets on human survival timeframes were now paying premium prices to learn human partnership techniques. 20-week comprehensive program, announced the human consultant to another waiting client. We'll cover bonding psychology, tactical integration, cross-species communication protocols, and advanced coordination strategies. Fair warning, our graduation requirements include successful field deployment with live combat scenarios. Live combat scenarios with Category 9 predators, repeated a Nexari officer slowly. Partnership means sharing risks as well as benefits. Can't develop genuine tactical coordination without mutual trust, and trust requires demonstrated commitment under pressure. Kexval realized he was witnessing the birth of an entirely new economic sector. Humans had transformed what everyone assumed was catastrophic species-level stupidity into the galaxy's most sought-after military expertise. "Sir," he said to Admiral Vextar, "may I ask what changed your mind about human tactical approaches?" "The casualty reports, from Proxima Relay," Vextar replied grimly, followed by similar results at Kepler Station, Andromeda Outpost, and the Centauri Colonial Authority. Every conventional force deployed against human companion units has been systematically outmaneuvered by opponents who fight like they're sharing a single tactical consciousness. The human consultant finished with her current client and turned toward them. "Admiral Vextar? I have your preliminary assessment results. Good news. Hegemony military personnel show excellent aptitude for partnership protocols. Bad news. Your institutional command culture requires complete restructuring before we can begin predator integration training." "How complete?" "Everything you think you know about military hierarchy, tactical coordination, and species superiority assumptions needs to be discarded and rebuilt from foundation principles up." The Admiral considered this with the weary acceptance of someone whose strategic options had been reduced to adaptation or irrelevance. "Timeline? 6 months minimum, assuming your officers can overcome cultural conditioning that treats cooperation as weakness and partnerships as compromise." As Vextar began negotiating consultation terms, Kexval found himself staring at his exotic pet inventory with newfound perspective. The creatures in his enclosures weren't just dangerous animals anymore. They were potential military assets, whose market value had increased exponentially thanks to human partnership innovations. A young Terran approached his booth, studying the available specimens with the same methodical interest that had started this entire transformation. "Interested in anything specific?" Kexval asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Those phase cats look promising. My unit specializes in stealth operations, and we've been looking for partners with dimensional mobility capabilities." The Zephyrian trader processed payment authorization with the resigned efficiency of someone who'd learned to stop questioning human judgment calls. As he completed the transaction, he realized that what had begun as the galaxy's most expensive suicide had become its most profitable revolution. Somewhere in the background, another alien military delegation was scheduling partnership consulting sessions, learning to treat apex predators as colleagues instead of weapons. The universe, it seemed, had developed quite an appetite for irony.